Thanks for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. As promised, before we went to that 2-minute break, we're going to be breaking down some of the largest stories of the day. And this includes Mike Waltz, as he's now out as President Trump's national security advisor. Of course, this has been a surprise move and the first major staff shakeup of President Trump's second term. Waltz has been under fire for setting up that group chat where attack plans were shared and a reporter was accidentally included in that chat, also known as Signalgate. We do want to check in now with Fox's Caroline Shively. She has much more from Washington on what's next for Mike Waltz.
A major job change for Mike Waltz. President Trump is removing him as national security advisor and nominating him to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
I've always felt that he was a professional guy who was well suited to advise this president or any president on national security issues. So I was kind of surprised to see that news today.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio will now serve as acting national security advisor. Waltz had been under scrutiny after March's Signalgate fiasco when he accidentally added a reporter to a Signal group chat where U.S. attack plans against the Houthis were shared, something that will likely come up during his confirmation hearing.
I think it would be pretty brutal. And let's see what happens.
But it was Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth who's accused of sharing the sensitive details. Some Democrats have speculated his job could also be in danger.
He's got to go. And if he doesn't have the dignity to resign, Trump should fire him.
But Hegseth clearly had Trump's support at a national prayer event Thursday.
Pete Hegseth, who's doing a fantastic job.
Trump previously fired 6 National Security Council officials a month ago after meeting with far-right activist Laura Loomer, who claimed the 6 were not loyal enough to the president. In Washington, Caroline Shively, Fox News.
Our thanks to Caroline Shively for that report. And again, this major shakeup has been making headlines all day long. So to talk more about this, I want to bring into the conversation political analyst Brian Sobel. Brian, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. Of course, we know it's official. Mike Waltz is now out as the leader of the NSA, the National Security Advisor. What's next for him? Were you surprised to hear that he was going to be removed from this role following what they've been calling Signalgate?
I think we were getting a feeling, Christina, coming out of Washington, D.C., and among people we know back there, that it was becoming more and more tenuous in terms of him holding that position. The scandal, the fact that a lot of people around in his orbit did not think he was doing a great job. When you lose the confidence of the president or any boss, your days are numbered, and I think that's what happened to him. Now he is being nominated to be our ambassador to the United Nations. That requires Senate confirmation. And Senate confirmation is going to be very, very tough. And I think when people say, well, why did the president then nominate him for the United Nations? I think it's because Donald Trump does not think that the United Nations is as important as a lot of these other positions that Mike Waltz would have possibly been considered for. It's a very important job, the United Nations, and yet, and on the scale of things, maybe it's of lesser importance. And so I think Donald Trump wanted to make sure it didn't look like he had chaos going on in his cabinet. So he eased him out and found another place where he could put him. And it's only a nomination at this point.
I think that is important to know. I also want to put up the statement that we have from President Trump in response to the firing of Mike Waltz from that initial position. He says, I am pleased to announce that I will be nominating Mike Waltz to be the next United States ambassador to the United Nations. From his time in uniform on the battlefield in Congress and as my national security advisor, Mike Waltz has worked hard to put our nation's interests first. I know he will do the same in his new role, but in the interim, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will be serving as national security advisor while continuing his strong leadership at the State Department. Together, we will continue to fight tirelessly to make America and the world safe again. Thank you for your attention to this matter. He posted that on True Social. And before we get to the portion about Secretary of State Marco Rubio, you mentioned something important. You said on the scale of importance, National Security Advisor is typically seen as a bit higher than Ambassador to the UN. How do you think Mike Waltz will react to this? Will he be taking on that job? Is it kind of seen as a slight in his eyes to think that he wasn't capable of handling the National Security Advisor position?
Well, it's a good question. I don't know how Waltz feels about it, but he does have a military background. And sometimes you march to the sound of guns. He was asked to take on a different role. I saw his statement today that he looks forward to the role of ambassador to the United Nations. How he feels personally, one would not know without being very close to him, very, very close to him. But it's not good when you've been somebody who's been that close to the president in the West Wing, in every meeting, and then you're being eased out to New York City to be the ambassador to the United Nations, where by and large, again, very important role, but it does not have a national profile the way all these other jobs do in and around Washington, D.C. and in the West Wing.
Yep, he'll be heading from Washington, D.C. there to the Big Apple, where we have this shot there of the Statue of Liberty as well. So, again, I did want to put a pause on it for a second before we head into Secretary of State Marco Rubio. This is going to be critical. He's going to be serving in the interim as the National Security Advisor. He's also Secretary of State, though, which is a very demanding job. I have to ask you, Brian, we haven't seen this happen often in history. Henry Kissinger did it back in the 70s. But what is it going to be like for him to try to balance these two roles? Historically, can we pull on any evidence from Henry Kissinger's time doing both roles to see how this is even possible?
Well, good piece of history there, Christina, and I always love history. And yes, Henry Kissinger is the person who was Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. But Henry Kissinger was an international expert, a brilliant thinker, really a monumental figure in American history. And so covering those two jobs was something Kissinger could do. He helped Nixon open China when China was a very closed society, as an example. Marco Rubio, senator, former senator, also a very, very smart guy. He will take on these two roles, but I don't think he'll carry them for very long. I think when you had a towering intellect like Henry Kissinger, having two roles that are that complex was doable, but not easy. I think now Marco Rubio has more actually than two roles. He's got like 4 roles that he's overseeing right now, and that's a lot for one person. But I think for the short term, he can pull it off.
And it will certainly be interesting to see how he's able to balance all of those new roles. But he's been, again, in the position of Secretary of State ever since President Trump did come into office the second time around. So let's talk about ultimately as well. I want to put this up on your screen. We mentioned those roles. He's now Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, acting U.S. aid administrator, and acting archivist. Have you ever seen someone hold so many roles simultaneously? Is this a normal thing to happen when there is a change that is made in the administration?
Well, American history has numerous examples of people in public office or around the president holding more than one title, more than 2, maybe 3. 4 is a lot, and that's why I think this can't go on for very, very long. So I think what we're going to see pretty quickly are some other names bubbling up that the president may decide would be the National Security Advisor. You'll recall that in his first term, O'Brien was his National Security Advisor for over 2 years, which was a long time at that time in the Trump orbit. But somebody like O'Brien or other people in Washington, D.C., although O'Brien is now in Los Angeles working for a boutique law firm. But, the president can call on any number of people around the country to fill that role.
And so let's talk about some of those folks who have been in the past in the role of National Security Advisor. The next person will be the sixth within these 2 terms that President Trump is holding. We do know that Michael Flynn, he had the shortest stint. He was only there from January to February of 2017. H.R. McMaster held the position from February 2017 to April of 2018. John Bolton was there from April of 2018 to September of 2019. And as you mentioned, Robert O'Brien, September 2019, all the way until President Trump left office in January of 2021. Now, Michael Waltz, January to May of 2025. In comparison to those past folks who have held this position, Michael Flynn, of course, notably being the shortest, January to February of 2017. What do you think ultimately will be the aftermath, maybe the reputation that Mike Waltz now has to face as well? Again, he's in company with others who've been in the position a shorter amount of time, but where is he able to go from here if he is able to get confirmed as the ambassador to the UN?
If he's confirmed to the United Nations as our ambassador, I think he can work hard, do a great job representing our country there. The United Nations is incredibly complex, and it'll utilize all his talent.